They entered the midnight archive, chasing whispers of forbidden knowledge. Emily, Ethan, and Logan thought they were uncovering secrets, but the truth uncovered them. Books that revealed their darkest regrets, a librarian who demanded sacrifices, and a final word etched in glowing letters: return. But as the library vanished into the freezing night, one chilling question haunted their minds. What if they never truly left? The moment the doors shut, an unsettling silence enveloped them. The once faint hum of the library now sounded like a heartbeat, growing louder with each passing second. Emily glanced back at the doors, but they had vanished, replaced by an unbroken wall of shelves towering above them. "This is not normal," Ethan murmured, his voice trembling. Logan's phone flickered, the screen showing strange static patterns before shutting off completely. "Okay, that's not good," he said, panic creeping into his tone. "Stay calm," Emily said, trying to keep her composure, though her own pulse raced. "We came to find answers. Let's not freak out yet." As they moved deeper into the labyrinthine library, the glowing books seemed to react to their presence. One book floated off the shelf and landed at Emily's feet with a soft thud. Its cover bore no title, only a strange, shifting symbol that resembled an eye. Against her better judgment, she picked it up. "Emily, maybe don't touch that," Ethan warned, taking a cautious step back. But it was too late. The moment she opened the book, the room shifted violently. The floor beneath them rippled like water, and the shelves groaned as if alive. A whispering wind rose from nowhere, carrying faint voices. "Can you hear that?" Logan asked, his wide eyes darting around. Emily nodded, her fingers tightening on the book. The whispers grew louder, transforming into a single voice, deep and resonant. "Knowledge demands sacrifice." The lights flickered, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. Then, one by one, the books began to open, their pages flipping rapidly. From within their pages emerged ghostly figures, translucent and shrouded in faint golden light. Their hollow eyes stared at the trio. "Who are they?" Ethan asked, backing into Logan. "I think they're the ones who came before us," Emily whispered. "The ones who got lost here." The figures didn't move, but their presence was suffocating. Emily felt the weight of the book in her hands, now pulsating with energy. She looked down to find that its pages were blank except for a single line written in glowing script. "To leave, one must find the librarian." "The librarian?" Logan repeated, reading over her shoulder. That doesn't sound ominous at all. The figures surrounding them began to drift closer, their hollow eyes locking onto Emily as if drawn to the book she held. The whispers returned, now louder, and the shelves seemed to close in on them, cutting off every exit. "Run," Emily shouted, clutching the book tightly as the trio sprinted down a narrow aisle, the ghostly figures trailing behind them. The shelves shifted, rearranging themselves like a living maze, blocking their path at every turn. The glowing spines of the books flickered, as though mocking their desperation. In the distance, a faint but distinct sound reached their ears, a rhythmic tapping, like footsteps echoing across a marble floor. "Do you hear that?" Emily asked, skidding to a stop. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" "I think it's the librarian," Emily said, her voice a mix of fear and determination. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, as though whoever, or whatever, was approaching knew exactly where they were. The ghostly figures stopped in their tracks, as if retreating from the sound. "What do we do now?" Logan asked, his voice shaking. Emily clutched the book tighter and took a deep breath. "We find the librarian. We don't have a choice." As the tapping grew closer, the trio stood frozen, their breaths coming in short, terrified gasps. The shadows ahead of them shifted, and a tall figure began to emerge from the darkness, its features obscured but its presence undeniably powerful. And then, with a voice as cold as the grave, it spoke. "You seek knowledge. But are you ready to pay the price? The moment Ethan touched the cold surface of a mirror, it cracked, shattering into shards that floated around him. Each fragment reflected his greatest regrets. The time he betrayed a friend, the lie he told to escape blame, and the moment he chose comfort over courage. The air felt heavy, pressing down on him like the weight of his own guilt. "Let me out," he shouted, his voice echoing endlessly through the maze. But the mirrors only closed in tighter, their jagged edges seeming to taunt him. From the depths of his reflection, a shadow emerged, his own distorted image, a twisted mockery of himself. The shadow spoke in his voice, but with a venomous edge. "Why run, Ethan? You can't escape who you are." Meanwhile, Logan found himself in a void of shimmering light, surrounded by floating symbols and glowing pathways that flickered like static. The book in his hand pulsed violently, and the pages turned on their own, revealing cryptic messages in a language he didn't understand. But as he stared, the symbols twisted into images from his own life, moments he had buried deep in his memory. A voice echoed around him, cold and analytical. "You pride yourself on logic, yet you ignore the truth in front of you. Will you solve the puzzle, or will you let ignorance consume you?" The pathways around him began to collapse, one by one, forcing him to move forward. The shimmering void started to darken, and every wrong step sent shockwaves through his body, as if punishing him for his hesitation. Emily, trapped in the city of whispers, clutched her book tightly. The streets crumbled beneath her feet, forcing her to keep moving. The whispers were relentless, their accusations growing louder with each step. "You chose ambition over kindness. You left when you should have stayed. You knew the truth but kept silent." Tears stung her eyes as she ran, her breath ragged. The crumbling buildings towered over her, their windows glowing with eerie light. In one, she saw a younger version of herself, hesitating to help someone in need. In another, she saw her turning away from a chance to make amends. The city seemed alive, feeding on her guilt. But then, in the midst of their torment, all three heard a voice, soft yet commanding, cutting through their respective horrors. "Face it, accept it, or be consumed." Emily stopped running. She clenched her fists, turned to the nearest whispering shadow, and shouted, "Yes, I made mistakes. I hurt people, but I won't let those mistakes define me." The whispers faltered, their tone shifting from accusation to acknowledgement, and the city began to stabilize. Ethan, staring at his shadowy doppelganger, whispered, "You're right. I can't escape who I am, but I can choose to be better." The mirrors around him shattered completely, leaving him in an open space filled with light. Logan, trembling as the pathways collapsed around him, finally stopped running. He stared at the pulsing book in his hands and said, "I don't know all the answers, but I'm ready to learn, no matter the cost." The void erupted into light, and the puzzle pieces aligned, forming a clear path forward. The trio suddenly found themselves back at the grand desk, the books now closed and lifeless. The librarian stood before them, his face still obscured but his presence less menacing. "You faced the truth," the librarian said. "Knowledge is not just about answers. It's about understanding yourself. You may leave, if you're ready." The grand doors of the library reappeared, creaking open to reveal the cold, foggy town square. The trio hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the towering shelves and the librarian, who now seemed to fade into the shadows. "Let's go," Emily whispered, leading the way out. As they stepped back into the night, the library disappeared behind them, leaving no trace it had ever existed. The winter solstice moon hung low in the sky, and the first rays of dawn broke the darkness. They exchanged silent looks, each understanding that they were no longer the same. The Midnight Archive had shown them their deepest fears, their greatest flaws, but it had also given them the chance to grow. And as they walked away, Emily couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, wondering if they had truly left the library behind, or if a part of it would always linger within them. Lesson. The story of the Midnight Archive leaves us with a hauntingly beautiful lesson about life, choices, and acceptance. It's a reflection of the challenges we all face, the weight of our regrets, the fear of confronting our past, and the temptation to rewrite what's already done. Emily, Ethan, and Logan's journey teaches us that growth doesn't come from erasing mistakes or uncovering every secret. It comes from accepting who we are, flaws and all. Emily realized that some mysteries are better left unsolved if the cost is too great. Ethan learned that his mistakes and imperfections are part of what makes him human, and Logan understood that his past, no matter how painful, was the foundation for his present. They each sacrificed something precious to escape the grip of the Midnight Archive, but in doing so, they gained something even greater, a sense of freedom and understanding. This story reminds us that life is about moving forward, not being trapped by the shadows of our own doubts and regrets. It's a powerful message. True courage is in facing your fears, embracing your imperfections, and letting go of what you cannot change. The Midnight Archive tested their souls, but in the end, it also freed them. What would you do if faced with such choices? Would you have the courage to confront your deepest fears and accept yourself for who you truly are? Think about it. And maybe, just maybe, this isn't the last we've seen of the Midnight Archive. The Midnight Archive may be gone, but its secrets aren't finished yet. Asterisk, what happened to the glowing word return? Is the story truly over, or just beginning? If this tale kept you on the edge of your seat, imagine what horrors the next one holds. What if the longest night of the year wasn't just a celebration of darkness, but a veil hiding your deepest fears? Tonight, as ice and shadows close in, one girl steps into her grandmother's mysterious tales. Will she be able to uncover a terrifying secret hidden in the cold night? This story will unravel secrets never before heard, and you'll have to face them. Watch as the truth behind this icy night is revealed. Do you have the courage to uncover it? The winter solstice was a sacred night in the small, isolated village of Frosthaven. Each year, the villagers gathered to celebrate this ominous occasion. They believed that on this night, the veil between the living and the dead grew dangerously thin, allowing unseen forces to cross over into the realm of the living. Amelia, a young girl, had come to Frosthaven for the first time to take care of her elderly grandmother, Martha. The weather had been harsh, and Martha's health had been deteriorating. But it wasn't just the winter that seemed to trouble her. Something far more unsettling lingered in the air. As Amelia entered the cottage, she immediately noticed the stillness. The air felt colder than it should have, even with the fire crackling in the hearth. Martha, wrapped in a thick shawl, sat in her chair by the window. The curtains were tightly drawn, blocking out all light. "Grandma, it's freezing in here. Why aren't the windows open?" Amelia asked, her breath visible in the cold air. Martha turned to her slowly, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sadness. "Close the curtains, child. Don't let them see in. Tonight, they're watching. They always come on this night." Amelia laughed nervously, thinking her grandmother's mind was just playing tricks on her due to her illness. But the eerie atmosphere in the cottage made her doubt her initial dismissive reaction. She made her way to the fireplace, adding more wood to the flame. As the fire crackled and popped, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. That night, the wind howled outside, and the snowstorm raged on, creating a relentless blanket of white across the land. Amelia tried to relax, but her mind kept returning to her grandmother's warning. "They're watching," she repeated silently, shuddering. Who were they? And why was tonight any different from any other winter night? Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. Amelia froze, her heart racing. It was a heavy knock, slow and deliberate, almost as though whoever was at the door was waiting for a response. She hesitated before walking cautiously toward the door, peering through the frosted glass of the door's small window. She saw nothing but a thick wall of snow. No footprints, no sign of life. Just the violent storm outside. A strange unease washed over her as she slowly turned the handle to open the door. But before she could do so, her grandmother called out from the other room. "Don't open it. Don't let them in. They'll find you if you do." Her voice trembled, but there was a force behind her words, an urgency that made Amelia hesitate. Amelia stood frozen at the door, her hand still on the knob. The wind howled louder, but it was as if everything in the house had fallen deathly silent. The only sound that remained was her grandmother's voice, now almost a whisper, barely audible over the storm. "The veil is thin tonight. You mustn't let them cross over. They'll take you if you do." Amelia took a deep breath and slowly backed away from the door. She wasn't sure what her grandmother meant by them or how tonight was any different, but something in the air made her heart beat faster. She turned to face her grandmother, but to her shock, Martha was no longer sitting in her chair. The cold, empty chair by the window stood silent, its back facing the darkened room. As Amelia stepped further into the forest, her heart began to race. The eerie silence pressed down on her like a heavy weight, and with every step she took, the crunch of the snow beneath her boots seemed deafening in the otherwise still air. The trees around her loomed tall and twisted, their branches weighed down with thick layers of snow, casting long, jagged shadows under the pale moonlight. The air was frigid, colder than anything Amelia had ever experienced. It felt as if the very atmosphere around her was alive, watching, waiting. Her breath came out in clouds of mist, and her fingers were numb from the cold as she gripped her camera tighter, determined to find an explanation for the strange occurrences. But as she walked deeper into the woods, she felt an unsettling presence, as if the forest itself was aware of her intrusion. The wind began to pick up, whispering through the trees in a language that seemed almost human, low, mournful, and yet full of an unnatural urgency. Amelia froze, her skin prickling with a sudden chill that wasn't just from the cold. The clearing appeared ahead, glowing eerily in the moonlight. It looked like a frozen oasis in the midst of the dark woods, the snow on the ground shimmering like a sheet of glass. At the center of the clearing stood the statue, its features obscured by layers of ice and snow. It looked almost like a woman, tall, graceful, but trapped in a solid mass of ice, her face contorted in a permanent expression of agony. Amelia moved closer, her breath catching in her throat as she noticed the eyes. They were wide open, glazed over with a frozen sheen, but they seemed to follow her every movement. Her heart skipped a beat. She could have sworn that the statue was alive, watching her, waiting. The inscription beneath the statue sent a chill running down her spine. "Disturb the heart of ice, and awaken its fury." What did that mean? Amelia wondered aloud, her voice trembling in the cold air. She knelt down beside the statue, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch the icy surface, as if the words called to her. Was it a warning or a challenge? As her fingers brushed the ice, a low guttural growl echoed through the trees. Amelia's body went rigid, her heart hammering in her chest. The air around her seemed to grow colder still, a biting, unnatural frost that seeped into her bones. Something was wrong. She yanked her hand back, but the growl didn't stop. It grew louder, as if it was circling her, drawing closer with each passing second. The ground beneath her seemed to tremble, and the once still trees began to creak and groan, as if something was moving among them. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the snow, a figure, tall and dark, moving swiftly between the trees. Amelia's pulse quickened as she turned to face it, her camera clutched in her shaking hands. Who? What was that? A voice echoed in her mind, the same voice her grandmother had warned her about. They are coming. The spirits of the winter, the ones who have waited for centuries. You cannot outrun them. You cannot escape their thirst for vengeance. Her eyes widened in terror. She was no longer alone. Something was out there, watching her, waiting for her to make the wrong move. Was she too late to stop it? Amelia turned, but the shadows had already begun to close in. The statue's eyes followed her, and as the wind began to howl, the ground beneath her feet cracked open with a loud, bone-chilling sound. The ice around the statue began to shift, as if it were alive, awakening from a long slumber. Was this the curse her grandmother had spoken of? In the distance, she could hear the whispers again, louder this time, growing in intensity. They were no longer just voices in the wind. They were tangible, real, and full of malice. Amelia felt the weight of their gaze, the coldness of their touch. She had disturbed the heart of ice. The growling, now deafening, surrounded her on all sides, but Amelia knew there was no way to run. The spirits of the winter had been released, and now she was a part of their hunt. Before Amelia could fully comprehend the inscription, the whispers turned into blood-curdling screams. The shadows of the trees stretched and twisted, creeping towards her like the icy claws of some frozen monstrosity. Amelia tried to run, but a dark figure appeared in her path, blocking her way. Its cold voice echoed through the night. "You have crossed the veil, now you belong to us." Amelia screamed in terror, but just as the air grew thick with dread, a golden flash of light burst forth, blinding her momentarily. The light was blinding, sharp and pure, cutting through the suffocating darkness like a knife. She shielded her eyes, heart pounding, as the silhouette of her grandmother, Martha, emerged from the light, holding an ancient orb glowing with an ethereal radiance. The shadows recoiled as the light expanded, and with a deep, guttural roar, the creature that had been lurking in the darkness vanished into the night, retreating back into the woods from which it had come. The oppressive air lifted, leaving Amelia gasping for breath. Back at the cottage, Martha slowly lowered the glowing orb, her face lined with years of knowledge and hidden pain. Amelia, still shaking, looked at her grandmother in disbelief. "That light," Martha explained softly, her voice steady despite the chaos, "is an ancient family heirloom, a beacon of protection passed down through generations. It is the only force capable of pushing back the spirits of winter, the ones that were awakened tonight. The curse is real, Amelia. These spirits have waited centuries for someone to disturb their prison. And you were the one who opened the door." Amelia felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she processed her grandmother's words. It had been real, the whispers, the shadows, the warnings. All those stories Martha had told her as a child, all the strange rituals, the fear of the long winter nights, they weren't just superstition. They were a fight for survival, an ancient battle between the living and the spirits of the cold. A battle she had now become a part of. As dawn's first light broke over the horizon, the heavy snow that had settled on the windows began to melt, and the eerie whispers faded into the silence of the morning. The forest outside seemed still once more, but Amelia knew it was only a brief reprieve. The spirits would return one day, and they would remember her. She understood now that the winter solstice was more than just the longest night of the year. It was a fragile balance between the realms, a night when the veil between the living and the dead grew dangerously thin. The spirits of the frozen past, those who had been trapped in the ice, would never forget the intrusion. Amelia gazed out of the window, her mind racing with the realization that her world had changed forever. This night, this curse, had awakened something far darker than she had ever imagined, and she was now bound to it. It wasn't just the longest night of the year anymore. It was the night when the lines between light and dark, life and death, had blurred. And in the shadows, something ancient and hungry still watched, waiting for the next soul to cross its path. And Amelia knew it wouldn't be long before they came for her again. Lesson. Finally, the story teaches us that our actions, no matter how small, can have lasting consequences. Amelia's initial decision to dismiss the warnings and venture into the forest led to her encounter with the spirits of the past. The story serves as a reminder that our decisions can alter the course of our lives and even affect others in ways we might not foresee. Amelia's realization that she was now bound to the spirits that haunted Frosthaven is a reflection of how sometimes we may find ourselves entangled in situations that we cannot escape from, no matter how hard we try. In essence, the lesson from this story is a deep reflection on the consequences of curiosity and the need to respect ancient wisdom, the balance between light and darkness, and the enduring strength of legacies that protect us from unseen forces.
Do you believe that something as innocent as a shopping trip could seal your fate? Have you ever purchased something cursed, This isn't just a story, it's a warning. But beware, this tale isn't for the faint-hearted. Can you handle the truth hidden behind a simple holiday bargain? I doubt you'll make it to the end, but if you do, you'll never love it shopping the same way again. It was a crisp winter evening, the day before Christmas, when the streets transformed into a festive wonderland. The city was alive with twinkling lights, the air filled with the sweet scent of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon. Emily Carter, a lover of all things vintage, held Michael's hand tightly as they strolled through the crowded holiday market. Everything felt perfect, or so it seemed. But beneath the cheerful laughter and glowing decorations, something sinister stirred, hidden in plain sight. They meandered through the lively stalls, passing by vendors selling handmade crafts, glistening ornaments, and warm pastries. Emily's excitement was palpable as she searched for something unique, a treasure she could cherish. But as they walked, a cold breeze cut through the festive warmth, sending a shiver down her spine. Then she saw it. A booth unlike any other, cloaked in dark, tattered fabric, tucked into the shadowy corner of the market. Its sign creaked in the wind. Treasures of the past, one-of-a-kind finds. Unlike the vibrant stalls around it, this booth radiated an eerie stillness. Emily felt drawn to it, as if it called to her. "Emily, let's go." "This place gives me the creeps," Michael urged, but she barely heard him. Her gaze was locked on a small silver locket displayed on a velvet cloth. The intricate design shimmered faintly, almost like it was breathing. The vendor appeared suddenly, his gaunt face pale, his eyes sunken and hollow. His voice was like dry leaves brushing against pavement. "You have an eye for the extraordinary," he said, his lips curling into a ghostly smile. "But be warned, this locket carries a history." Emily, mesmerized, asked, "What kind of history?" His smile faded, a tragic one. Despite the vendor's warning, Emily couldn't resist. She purchased the locket, ignoring the growing unease in her chest. As the vendor's cold fingers brushed hers, he whispered, "What's bought with curiosity must be kept with caution." Michael frowned as they walked away. "Why would you buy something like that? It's creepy." Emily shrugged, brushing off the tension. "It's just a locket." But deep down she felt it too. Something wasn't right. That night, as they settled in their cozy apartment, Emily examined the locket again. She ran her fingers over the intricate design, feeling an unnatural chill seep into her skin. She clasped it around her neck and admired it in the mirror. But as she turned away, she noticed her reflection didn't move. She froze. The image in the mirror remained, staring back at her with lifeless eyes. Then, with a flicker, it mimicked her movements again. Emily let out a shaky breath. "I must be imagining things," she whispered. But she wasn't. At exactly 3:00 a.m., the whispers began. "Give it back." Emily jolted awake, her heart pounding. She sat up, straining to hear over the silence. There it was again. "Give it back, all suffer." She shook Michael awake. "Did you hear that?" Michael groaned. "It's just a dream. Go back to sleep." But it wasn't a dream. The locket's chill intensified, as if it was draining the warmth from her body. The next morning, dark circles shadowed Emily's eyes. She tried to convince herself it was stress, but deep down she knew something malevolent had followed her home. The whispers grew louder each night. Objects moved on their own. The air turned icy cold. The locket felt heavier, almost like a noose around her neck. It wouldn't come off. No matter how hard Michael tried, the clasp remained locked, as if it were alive. In desperation, it returned to the market. But the booth was gone. The space where it once stood was empty. Emily trembled. It's like it was never there. Michael held her close. "We'll figure this out." But the locket had other plans. That night, Emily awoke to find Michael missing. She frantically searched the apartment, only to find him standing in the living room, eyes glazed over, whispering, "Give it back." The ghost's true desire. Terrified, Emily realized that the spirit wasn't just angry, it was desperate. She pieced together the locket's history. It belonged to a young woman who had been wronged, murdered on Christmas Eve, her soul trapped in the locket, cursed to relive the torment. The only way to break the curse was to acknowledge her pain. Emily whispered, "I'm sorry for what happened to you." The locket grew warm and the ghostly presence softened. Michael snapped out of his trance. The locket unclasped, falling to the floor in ashes. What lesson do you learn from this story? In the rush of holiday cheer, we often forget that the past lingers, waiting to be acknowledged. This story is more than a tale of ghosts and curses. It's a reminder of the dangers of ignorance and the power of empathy. Sometimes, the things we buy, objects that seem harmless, carry unseen histories, scars of pain, loss, and longing. The locket wasn't just cursed by a ghost seeking revenge. It was a cry for recognition, for the truth to be heard, and for justice to finally be served. We live in a world where people's stories are often dismissed or forgotten, especially those who have suffered in silence. The ghost wasn't evil, it was broken, longing for release. Emily's journey teaches us that facing the darkness is the first step toward finding peace, not only for the restless spirit but for ourselves. Had Emily ignored the whispers, she might have been consumed by fear, but by showing compassion, she broke the cycle of vengeance. In acknowledging the ghost's pain, she did what others had failed to do, she listened. And in doing so, she freed both the spirit and herself. We must remember that even the most beautiful things, like a holiday locket, can carry a darkness we don't understand. In life, empathy can be the key to breaking the chains of the past. It can heal wounds that have festered for years, and can prevent new ones from forming. Ask yourself, how often do we pass by someone in pain, ignoring their suffering? How often do we choose to listen with our hearts, not just our ears? The true horror is not in the haunting itself, but in the ignorance that allows suffering to linger. By opening our eyes and hearts, we can prevent such tragedies from repeating. So, the next time you purchase something that feels a little too heavy with history or hear a whisper from the shadows, remember, maybe, just maybe, it's asking for your understanding, not your fear. If this story gave you chills or made you think differently about the unseen, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more bone-chilling tales. But remember, sometimes the scariest hauntings are the ones we never see.